Hello and welcome to the Daily Records live stream where we look back over the events of the political week. With me, Torcuil Crichton, Chris McCall and Peter Davidson from our political team. It's August. Both parliaments are still in recess, but that doesn't mean politics stands still at all. This week, the three big stories of the season: who's going to be the next Prime Minister, the cost of living crisis, and this continuing debate over freedom of speech, all came together in one place at one time at the Scottish Tory leadership hustings in Perth. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss turned up, not so much to throw pelters at each other, but to throw pelters at the idea of independence and Nicola Sturgeon's proposals for a second referendum campaign. They were both firmly against the idea of breaking up the union, as you'd expect. Outside the hall, people were throwing pelters as well. There was a very lively, aggressive and sometimes abusive pro-independence campaign, which hurled insults at those going into the hustings, and also at James Cook, the renowned BBC Scotland, BBC Westminster Scottish political editor, who was harried by some members of that protest. Throwing pelters as well from far away was Keir Starmer and the Labour Party, with demands for a big windfall tax to freeze these big rises in bills that are due to hit our mats in October, January and then April, by which time it might cost £5,500 a year to heat the average family home. Let's start rolling back to Perth. Chris, you were there. You were a man on the ground, so to speak, with an eyewitness account. Give us a word picture, first of all, of what it was like inside the hall. What are these two like when they squared up to each other IRL, in real life, as they say?
Well, yeah, I mean, much of the focus of the Tory party hustings in Perth this week has been on what happened outside the concert hall. But what happened inside, I mean, to be brutally honest, it wasn't that exciting. I mean, we've had so many of these party hustings now between Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. We've kind of reached the stage where we've heard it all before. They have changed some of their policies slightly in recent weeks, but largely they've stuck to their guns on their particular points. And it was kind of the greatest hit sets being played by both Rishi and Liz in Perth on Tuesday. As you said, both of them remain firmly opposed to the idea of an Indie Ref 2 happening, whether it's October, whether it's the year after. You know, if whichever one of them becomes Prime Minister, they're adamant they're not going to allow this to happen. But away from the big constitutional question, Colin, Mackay, the STV political editor, he was in Perth to chair the hustings, and he was asking questions to both Rishi and Liz. And he started, and both of them, when he sat down to interview the two of them individually, he really tried to focus in on the cost of living and particularly the energy crisis. And, you know, he was really trying to, get them to say something on what their plan would be, if and when they take to Downing Street. How are they going to, bring down the terrifying predicted costs of energy? We've all seen the stories in recent days on how expensive it's going to get next year if the price caps are allowed to rise as expected. And Liz Truss wouldn't really say anything on that. She even went as far as to say, I'm not going to predict what my, Chancellor will do in his budget, as if, the Chancellor just creates budgets in isolation and would never take ideas or, being told what to do by the Prime Minister. And frankly, sitting in the stalls, I thought that was just a ridiculous stance to take. I mean, speaking personally, I'm worried about what my energy bills are going to be like, and I'm sure many other people in the hall were as well. And
it didn't seem to do her any harm in the hall that she was there, and neither did it do her any harm that an audio tape was released just half an hour before she stood up, in which she condemned British workers for not grafting hard enough. The selectorate, the Conservatives in the hall and across the UK, who will choose the next leader, next Prime Minister, didn't seem too bothered with the cost of living, or did they? You spoke to some of them. What were their priorities? They seemed to cheer a lot when both said they were against independence, but little else.
We have to be fair to Liz Truss and say, this is an election involving Conservative Party members, and it's an election that right now she stands to win, and win quite handsomely. And within the hall, within the Tory Party members, it was clear that the majority of the 650 roughly people that were there to see the hustings, that most of them were absolutely Team Liz. She got the bigger reactions, the bigger rounds of applause, and it was clear that she's the favoured candidate. And you could say that she tailored her answers a bit more towards the Scottish audience. She was giving shout outs to how she would help the farming community and fishing communities. Farming, obviously, and agriculture and hospitality are all kind of big employers in Perthshire.
Yeah, so, she's all talk on that, of course, because she has refused to turn up at an NFU hustings. Today she's going to be empty-chaired by the NFU because there are some awkward questions for her to answer on the trade deals she made with Australia and with India as well. Peter, you were looking in from afar, live blogging your life out of that, squeezing as much news as you could out of that 2-hour event on Tuesday. I was struck how little they had to say about the biggest issue of the week, of the month, of the year, the cost of living crisis. Now, Labour made hay on that this week with Keir Starmer's big announcement that he'd put 29 billion to freeze the bills at their October levels for 6 months. He got some criticism from that. He got some flack from that, from the Tories saying it was just a sticking plaster, and some economists said it would actually lead to inflation. But he got plenty of headlines out of it, didn't he?
Yeah, and also that I think there was a poll amongst Tory members, and a lot of them were in favour of it as well, which is quite an interesting kind of outcome. But yeah, like Chris was saying, we've heard all the argument, all the plans from Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, and we're starting to get to the stage where it's kind of, we just need to focus on Liz Truss's policies, because we know how far she is ahead in the polls. And we know that what her policies are, they're just not going to touch the sides in terms of cancelling the national insurance rise and the Green Levy. And what's interesting, I think it was last week or maybe the week before that the Treasury is there's people in there looking to present something to Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak when they come in, their kind of plans. So it'll be interesting to see what she takes on from them, really. But yeah,
there's two interesting kind of polls. One, there's a poll that puts Liz Truss 32% ahead of Rishi Sunak, so it looks like she is going to be the clear winner here. But every other poll shows that Labour's plan for an energy cap freeze is massively popular with Tories as well. And I just wonder if Liz Truss has made a huge favour here for Labour and for Starmer and for the opposition by putting herself the wrong side of public opinion on this big question.
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a bold. It's kind of probably the first time we've really seen a big, bold statement from Labour going, "This is what we would do." I mean, you can argue there's kind of other little things that they've come out with, but this is a real big one. And I think people seeing that, people maybe have been kind of speaking to their families and saying, why don't we just stop the cap? These companies are making huge profits, and it's a sensible decision. We had what Gordon Brown came out with temporary nationalisation last week, and I think a lot of people came out and said maybe that's not the right idea. It seems that, and we know that it's no secret that Gordon Brown is kind of helping Labour at the moment, kind of with policy and things like that. So he's kind of putting the little feelers out, and kind of maybe didn't go too well, the nationalisation plan. So he's come kind of, Starmer said, you know what, we can go maybe a step back and go, you know what, let's put the cap in. So yeah, it's a bold one. It's good, and it's the first time that Labour's really seized the initiative on something, because I think a lot of people are wanting Starmer to do that, to really show that now the Boris Johnson circus is over, he needs to come through and be the kind of sensible head, and I've got the policies that will really kind of help people get by this winter.
It's certainly, Labour made more headlines in the last 5 days than it did in the last 5 weeks, I think, on this issue and other things. I do wonder, though, if Liz Truss is simply holding back. She's promised this emergency budget in September when she becomes the Prime Minister. Obviously, she'll get a bounce. Every new Prime Minister does. And then if she has a big handout ready to kind of trump Labour, the same way as Sunak trumped Labour's idea for the original windfall tax, he gave them windfall tax plus. Now, if she's actually ruled out a windfall tax, but she may have some other targeted scheme towards, low-income households, which might work. I can only assume she's holding back because this is such a kind of front and centre issue for everyone, and not just low-income households. We saw that report in The Guardian today showing how millions of households will find themselves in fuel poverty if the prices go up as predicted. And in the Daily Record this week, we have this amazing, well, not quite amazing, almost unbelievable chart breaking down the cost of daily household chores and activities and how much they will cost if the prices go up. Your 10-minute shower will cost you £1. Multiply that by 4 for a family of 4, multiply by 7 for the week, multiply by 4 for the month, and you're adding more than £100 a month to your bill just to keep clean. The case for knocking on the door of a bathroom occupied by a lazy teenager has never been stronger, you would say, to keep the prices down. But it's coming down the tracks, isn't it, Chris? This cost of living crisis, and it's only just one of the things that'll be in a Prime Minister's entry, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you referenced the study that was in The Guardian today that was carried out by the University of York, and they basically found that if the price caps go up as expected by January, that about 73%, so right, let's say 3/4 of households in Scotland could find themselves living in fuel poverty. Now, it's important when we define fuel poverty, that's different to other kinds of poverty. That's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's if you're spending more than 10% of your disposable income purely on, on fuel, basically. So it doesn't mean that, everyone, 3/4 of households will be plunged into poverty, but basically, in layman's terms, it's the majority of Scots are going to be spending far too much on fuel, and it will impact in all kinds of ways. They'll be spending less on other things. They'll be spending less on food. They'll be spending less on the clothes they wear, and obviously, and on nights out. This all impacts on the wider economy. It's been predicted that the UK is heading for recession. One of the reasons it's heading for recession is people are spending less all round, not just on nights out, but just everywhere. People are cutting back, and the implications for businesses. Undoubtedly, we're going to see more and more go to the wall as a result. So the situation is pretty grim, especially for whoever. Let's say it's going to be Liz Truss. It's going to be the next Prime Minister. Their entry has an unimaginable number of issues that are going to need work, and are going to need work really quickly. And as you said, Torcuil, I'm sure Liz and her team will have things that they're working on right now. They're not going to announce them just now. They're saving them when she's in the door in Downing Street. But we've got to hope that whatever their plan is going to be pretty substantial, because the alternative really doesn't bear thinking about.
There's some pressure too, of course, Peter, on Nicola Sturgeon and the Scottish Government to do something about this too. And as Sarwar got in the Act earlier this week, is seen as a moral duty on the Scottish Government to give more support. Labour are going to put this rent freeze, this idea before Parliament when they go back, and they've called for more transparency. They've asked where the money is and why a lot of that reserve funding that the Scottish Government hasn't been used or won't be deployed to help the poorest. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so Scottish Labour's plan is kind of a number of things really that one will come from money to have to come from the Scottish Government, and others won't come, which will kind of help them out. And there's been a lot of the Scottish Government saying that this is Westminster needs to help, but Labour's plan doesn't involve any cash really for the government. So there was the ones that do is kind of having the ScotRail fares and freeze them for next year, kind of helping local authorities with bus fares as well, and kind of writing off school meal arrears as well. But there was also the freeze on rent and the stopping evictions over the winter. So a number of kind of policies put out there, which were kind of, to be honest, I mean, I think there was the Business Minister, Ivan Mackay, was on the radio on Wednesday saying that, yes, well, kind of the standard response, we'll look at these things. But Starmer also said that he accused the government of hiding money, which is, he was referencing this £241 million reserve fund that they were speaking about. And Ivan Mackay said that, well, this is why we're having this emergency budget review, to see where the money is and where we can help families as much as possible. But I think Labour was right to say, like, the Scottish government could be doing more, because a lot of people are kind of asking, like, why is it always have to rely on Westminster? There could be more help from the Scottish government.
Yeah. And Nicola Sturgeon, to be fair to her, hasn't been quiet in this either. She has promised to shake the tree with this emergency budget review of Scottish spending. She's called for a summit, a UK summit on the cost of living crisis, which I think Boris Johnson had offered earlier and offered again earlier this week, although he probably won't be around to deal with that. He's on his second holiday of the summer in Greece this week. A couple of months ago they couldn't sack this guy because there was a war in Europe, and now he's on the beach topping up his tan, and the Russian bombs are still falling on Ukraine. Chris, before we go to wrap up, let's go back to Perth Hall and what was going on outside the hall. I mean, one of the biggest stories that overshadowed the week was the attack on Salman Rushdie in America, which was really an attack on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Not on the same scale, of course, but there was some quite ugly scenes outside Perth, that hall in Perth, with a crowd of angry protesters heckling and pelting people who were going along to the meeting with eggs. And there was a kind of horrible encounter caught on video phone of James Cook, the BBC's Scotland political editor, getting caught up in a wrangle with some of the protesters. Tell us a little bit about that and how it looked while you were there in Perth.
I think the first thing to say is that protests outside party political events in Scotland, across the UK, of course, are nothing new. And that's not to excuse the worst behaviour that we saw on Tuesday night. But Jackson Carlaw himself, former leader of the Scottish Conservatives, he made the observation that he's seen protests outside Tory events in Perth over the last 40 years, going back right to the early 80s in the days of the first Margaret Thatcher administration. So, Scottish Conservatives, they're not shrinking violets. They are used to seeing people campaigning against their party and policies at events. But that being said, what we saw on Tuesday, I myself saw some elderly Tory party members who were waiting to get through the security fence that was in front of the Perth Concert Hall that you had to get through. So the police and stewards were checking that you effectively had a ticket to get in before you then walked up to the concert hall. And there was one guy, I mean, I'm not going to make assumptions about his own political persuasions, but he was basically standing and just not screaming, but saying in a pretty loud and clear manner, some pretty unpleasant things at these people standing to get in. And these were people, you're talking in their 60s and 70s. They're minding their own business. They're going to a party political event, as is their right. They don't need this. And I'm standing there, and I actually, the guy then turned to me, to kind of carry on his own sort of one-man protest. And I said to him, look, I'm here to work, but that doesn't, make it right what you're saying. And the guy apologised to me. So by assumptions, he's, it's okay to abuse Tory party members, but he then saw the error of his ways because I was a journalist. And obviously, that's just not on, is it? It's just...
But journalists were getting abuse as well. Outside the hall, yes, we saw James Cook getting some abuse. But inside the hall, when Colin McRae, STV's political editor who was chairing the event, asked some fairly straightforward questions about the independence referendum, about what a generation meant, he was heckled and booed by Tory audience members, which showed how uncomfortable that party is dealing with hard questions as well. Peter, both sides of this debate, or supporters of both sides of this debate, seem to exhibit a certain amount of intolerance of the issue being debated at all, except on their terms.
Yeah, I mean, we've. I think a lot of people were also kind of on the conservative side were saying that we hope that this is not what's to kind of come, with happening if the kind of referendum goes ahead, because it was ugly, and there was when you hear about kind of reports of people being spat at and the eggs being thrown, and yeah, it's not what debate should be like in this country, and any country for that matter. But it's I think I hope it doesn't. I mean, it shouldn't be happening, and let's hope that it kind of calms down and we can get on a sensible debate around about the most important topics about.
Absolutely, and it was. I mean, these scenes were condemned by David Linden, SNP MP, for example, and Pete Wishart, who is the MP for Perth. But little thanks they got from some online indie warriors for their efforts. They were condemned as well. And Nicola Sturgeon condemned the verbal abuse of James Cook as well. I think, as we all would, je suis James Cook, we can all say this week. And let's hope the debate continues in an ordered, structured, respectful way. Hopefully, the Daily Record, as a newspaper and a digital platform, can host quite a lot of that ongoing debate on Scotland's future, on who will be the next Prime Minister, and the big question of the season, the cost of living crisis. Listen, thanks, guys, for giving us your opinions and your views this week, and thank you all for tuning in. Keep reading the site, keep buying the paper. Thank you and goodbye.